right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's ARF Brown Bag Lecture. Got our speaker, David Hyde, here for you, waiting in the wings. I am one of the grad student organizers of the Brown Bag series. My name is Jordan Brown. I'm a grad student here, and very excited to have one of our own on the program again. I don't have any big announcements for y'all here, but I do want to flag that next week's Brown Bag Talk will be another fun one with another alum, Annalisa Morris, who is currently a high school teacher in Oakland, and she will be talking with us about education in archaeology and archaeology and education. So I'm very excited about that. Before we get going today, I will begin with a land acknowledgement, and it's modeled on that developed by the Native American Student Development Office in partnership with the Muwekma Ohlone tribe. This is a working formulation which will be replaced with language reflecting the particular position of the ARF community and developed in collaboration with appropriate stakeholders. We're working on that. The Archaeological Research Facility sits on the territory of Cochun, the ancestral and unceded land of the Chochenyo Ohlone, the successors of the historic and sovereign Verona Band of Alameda County. We hereby acknowledge that this land remains of great importance to the Ohlone people, that every member of the ARF community benefits from the continued occupation of this land, and that it is our responsibility to support Indigenous sovereignty and hold the University of California accountable to the needs of American Indian and Indigenous peoples. So for our talk this week, as I mentioned briefly before, we have David Hyde here, who completed his PhD in anthropology at Berkeley in 2019, studying emergent community relations and material practices within a pluralistic workforce at a historic era lime kiln and company village on the Santa Cruz coast. Since 2018, he's been working as a principal investigator and historical archaeologist for Far Western Anthropological Research Group out of their Sausalito office, so not all too far away. And in this role, he has conducted archaeological projects within an environmental compliance framework throughout Northern California, participating in all aspects of that work, from project management to fieldwork, historical research, artifact analysis, reporting, and all that goes with all that. So we're looking forward to hearing about all of these things today. We've got a bevy of current grad students here with us on the Zoom as well. So looking forward to a lively discussion afterwards. So bring your questions. If you're not in the Zoom and you're on the YouTube, feel free to post in the chat and we will convey the questions there as well. So without any further ado, I'll turn it over to David for Cultural Resource Management, the Wide and Wild World of Consulting.
All right, thanks very much. I'm just gonna share my screen here. Can you guys see that okay? Yeah, I'll take the lack of response as a yes.
Yep, you got it.
Awesome, great. Well, first of all, thank you very much. Thanks for the great invitation, or excuse me, introduction and the invitation. You know, I wish I was back in person in the ARF, obviously, getting to see you all in person. But it's, you know, it's really nice seeing some familiar names and faces and your little tiles floating over there. So yeah, thank you again for the invitation. So yeah, that was a nice introduction, hit on some of my background, so I won't go too much into that. As mentioned, I am currently working at Far Western Anthropological Research Group as a principal investigator. Bit of a mouthful, so I'm just going to call it Far Western. That's what most people call it. And yeah, you know, I work in the consulting kind of world of CRM. I saw that you had Alexandra a couple weeks ago who gave a talk, so I'm hoping this might be a nice kind of counter or parallel conversation from her sort of perspective from the TIPO world, which is definitely CRM, but very different than the consulting world. So yeah, I also understand it's supposed to be pretty informal. So, you know, I'll try to keep my sort of spiel relatively short, 15 minutes or so, so that I can turn it over to the important stuff, which is, you know, kind of questions and interests that you guys might have for me. So I will just kind of give you a little bit of a roadmap for where the sort of intro part of this talk will go. I'll give you a little bit of an insight into kind of my journey into CRM. That's not because I like talking about myself. In fact, it's kind of horrifying. But when I talk to people about, careers and what I'm doing, I often get a lot of questions about that. How did you get into it? Why are you working there? All that kind of stuff. Then I'm going to try to give you a little bit of a insight into the daily life, kind of what I do on a day-to-day basis, what I do in my current position. Then I'm going to talk specifically about the role and opportunity for community engagement within CRM. This was sort of specifically asked. Sounds like there's an interest in knowing what that looks like and what that can be. So I'll talk about that. And then I'm going to try to kind of distill some of the main ideas to what I think are kind of the good and bads, like any job of CRM. And spoiler alert, it kind of depends on your perspective and who you are, whether it's good or bad. And so my kind of goal of this intro part of our talk today is to kind of give you some candid and personal insights into what a job in the CRM consulting world, fresh out of a PhD program, kind of looks like, with the kind of thought that you might be able to get something from that, think about whether it might be a good career option for you or not, just kind of provide some insights for you. Okay, so yeah, as Jordan was saying, for those of you who I didn't overlap in the program with, I graduated from Berkeley in 2019, so not too long ago. And there's probably some familiar faces for you there. I, like many people, entered the program, with a career goal of wanting to work in academia, getting that one of those coveted tenure track jobs. I had worked in CRM a little bit before coming to the program. I had worked as sort of on-call field and lab techs for some CRM companies. I had interned for the archaeology program of CAL FIRE. So I'd kind of worked in the contract compliance world a little bit, but to be honest, CRM was not really on my radar as sort of a career goal coming out of the program. But as I'm sure many of you can relate, a lot of things can change in the 6 to 10 to 12 years you might be in the program. Your priorities can change, your interests change. Importantly, but maybe not talked about that much, is like your life situations change. And all of this can lead to, one job option being maybe more appealing than another. So for me, one of the big things was I wanted to stay local. I was born and raised in the Bay Area. My wife's from the area. Both of our families are here. Her career is here. So we had to have some tough conversations not early on, but when I was sort of finishing up and starting to look at the job landscape. And we kind of decided that, at least for the short term, I'd kind of look locally. And if a tenure track kind of position was available in the general area, definitely go for it. But if it was like University of Arkansas or something, nothing against the Razorbacks, but I'd probably pass on that just for personal reasons. And this is one of the reasons why CRM started to look a little bit appealing, or at least as a possible job opportunity. As you probably already know, there are dozens of CRM companies in the Bay Area, the greater Bay Area, or environmental compliance companies that have a CRM component. And that it was, the local aspect was somewhat appealing, but it was also an opportunity to continue doing, like direct kind of archaeology, for lack of a better word, working with sites and resources and doing research. And then I knew that the work would probably be at least centered generally in California, which was my kind of geographic research area. So it was kind of around September 2018. I was on track to finish up my dissertation in spring of 2019, keeping an eye for the job, or keeping an eye on the job market. And I was perusing the Society for California Archaeology job board. The only reason I give you these details is because if you're not already looking at that and you want to work, especially locally, I highly encourage you to check out the SCA job board. It's where a lot of agency and CRM contract work gets posted. And yeah, there was a job posting through Far Western, and it met a lot of the sort of things I was looking for. And I had known a little bit about Far Western ahead of time. I I knew to me, they had kind of a reputation for doing really good and interesting research within the kind of umbrella of compliance and CRM. So it immediately kind of jumped out at me as a opportunity. And it's kind of amazing. I was talking to Nico before this started. It was really sort of serendipitous. This job posting for Far Western was for their brand new office in Sausalito, so not too far from Berkeley, for a sort of upper level historical archaeologist to help like basically start to build out their historical archaeology program that was going to be rooted in that office. So it was a really serendipitous kind of opportunity. And so I interviewed and got the job. And yeah, it was great. I started part-time until I finished my dissertation. They were super supportive of me kind of balancing both things and helping me do that. And then I hit the ground running full-time basically the day after I walked at graduation. So just a little bit of background on Far Western, just for your own knowledge as a sort of locally available archaeology opportunity. They're sort of mainly based in Davis, which is just south of Sacramento. But like I said, they now have a satellite office in Sausalito, which mainly focuses on Bay Area projects, but we do work everywhere, and has a sort of strong historical archaeology component. Far Western also has an office they call their Great Basin office in Carson City, which is near Lake Tahoe. So also a really awesome place to live. And then they have a desert branch office in Henderson, which is near Las Vegas. So I don't know, maybe a cool place depending on what you're into. But between those offices, we kind of have all of California and the Great Basin covered. And that's really where the majority of our work takes place. And there's about 100 full-time employees spread about those offices, most of them being in the Davis office. We have about 6 people in the Sausalito office, so it's not a huge office. So I got hired as a principal investigator. And so if you're not familiar with what that means in kind of the compliance world, you as a principal investigator, and that's kind of senior archaeologist or principal investigator is kind of the position you'd be coming out of a PhD program. And you're basically going to be expected to kind of do everything that is involved in managing an archaeological project in the CRM world. So everything from developing proposals, managing budgets, doing staffing, delegating different tasks, coordinating with departments, but also occasionally, out in the field, directing field crews. Once in a while, you get to actually look at an artifact and do some analysis. And then you're doing research and you're spending a lot of your time writing up these compliance reports, which is really your main product in CRM. That's your deliverable. Unfortunately, I don't have many super exciting photos of me sitting at my desk writing reports. So instead, I subbed in a couple cooler photos of some of our work in Marin County. That one on the left is in southern Marin. You can see Mount Tamalpais back there. I chose these specifically because of the other Berkeley connections. That's Monse Osterlei. She's a graduate of the undergrad anthropology program at Berkeley. And then that small little head popping out from behind the rock on the photo on the right is Michelle Mabey, who some of you might know and remember from her time at Berkeley. Both of them also work out of the Sausalito office. So lots of Berkeley connections and hopefully more in the future. All right, so wanted to talk a little bit about kind of the transition between grad school and academia and CRM. So I mentioned I had some, but not a ton of CRM experience. And when I first got the job, I thought, hey, I'm a pretty good archaeologist. This compliance stuff can't be too complicated. Shouldn't be that hard of a transition. And that actually really wasn't the case. I found there to be a pretty steep learning curve. So I want to touch on some of those things that kind of caught me by surprise. So one is just kind of like basic organizational structure. So like in grad school, you're used to doing everything yourself, right? You, for the most part, with support from your cohort and advisors, obviously. But if you want a GIS component in your dissertation, you're going to take 2 semesters worth of classes in the geography department and then teach yourself ArcGIS or bug Nico to teach you ArcGIS or something. So in the CRM world, in the professional world of archaeology, that's just not the case. We have a whole team of GIS people. We have a geoarchaeology team. We have like 10 different internal databases that do all sorts of cool stuff. We have a production team. We have something called accounts receivable, like stuff you would never imagine having to deal with being an archaeologist. And all of those things can be really great. They can be really great resources, but you got to get the hang of them. And kind of when you enter into a CRM company, it's a big machine that's moving pretty fast, and you have to kind of catch up with all of that stuff. And CRM companies are businesses, and they operate as such, and that can be quite different than maybe an academic department, which you're used to. Not necessarily better or worse, but definitely different. Another big difference is sort of the scope and the pace of work. So coming out of this program, you're going to be experts at archaeological theory and methods. You can do that at a very high level. You're going to be great writers and researchers and critical thinkers. No question, you're going to be able to do archaeology at a really high level. And those are definitely skills you're going to mobilize in CRM. But in CRM, especially consulting, archaeology in that sort of pure sense is really only one part of your job. And honestly, sometimes it's a small part of your job. When you're coming in with a PhD, you will be doing, like I said, some of that research design, field work, evaluating sites. But as much, if not more, of your job is going to be kind of project management type things, which I know you do project management with your dissertation work, but it's at a whole different level of scale. So you're going to be tracking budgets and schedules. You're going to be doing a lot of task delegation. You're going to be coordinating with other companies and other people doing other types of studies, right? Geological or biological studies for the project you're working on. You're going to be putting out fires constantly. You have to field questions from clients, all sorts of stuff that take up a lot of time that are not super archaeology related. And I know you get pulled in a lot of directions as a grad student, but honestly, when you're working in consulting, you might have sort of like 10 to 15 sort of dissertation project scale things going on at any one time. And they're all at different, they're all kind of at different stages. So yeah, I titled this talk, The Wide and Wild World of CRM Consulting, because I was trying to sort of capture that it is a really fast-paced environment. It's a really dynamic working environment, and it involves doing a really broad range of things, both archaeological and non-archaeological. With that, though, is you get to work on a real diversity of projects. And so you get great exposure to a bunch of different stuff. And if you're not, actually physically traveling to those areas, you're at least sort of mentally traveling to those areas from your desktop. And so, every day you're dealing with unexpected things or new things, or getting pushed out of your kind of comfort zone of your research area or your geographic expertise. So that can be a pretty cool and interesting part of the job. And none of this is necessarily meant to be framed as like a good or a bad thing. The reason I bring it up is because I think some people really thrive in that kind of environment, that dynamic environment, and others really don't. And honestly, I don't know if it's the environment I immediately thrived in, right? There was definitely a lot of work on my part. I've definitely never been accused of being super organized or managerial. So, even 2.5 years into this job, it's something I'm continuously learning about and how to do better and trying to grow. Another big difference is kind of the objective of CRM work. So, in the academic world, you kind of have free range in a lot of ways to develop a research project. But within CRM, like I said, the consulting world it works under a business model. So your objective is to do the best archaeology possible within the very defined scope and budget of a particular project. And so while there are mechanisms for reviewing, the quality of the archaeology, you are also accountable to the client, the one paying you to do the work. And so sometimes that can be at odds with itself. And so I think to be a good CRM professional and archaeologist, you need to have a really strong understanding of the regulatory frameworks, so the laws that guide your actions and possibilities. You need a really strong sort of ethical foundation, and you need to be really creative and savvy in finding ways that you can meet the demands of your clients while also doing, some really good and valuable archaeology. And honestly, not all CRM companies are the same in this regard. There can be a lot of window washing and box checking in archaeology in any sort of compliance job. So I would really encourage you, if you are thinking about working in CRM, to do some research, to talk to people that are in the field, to get a feel for sort of a company culture at any place you might want to work, because there are some areas where the archaeology gets sidelined, and you probably don't want to work at a place like that, if I'm being honest. I can really only speak to Far Western, and I can say that while we're not always perfect, the archaeology is always a primary focus of any work we're doing. And I think I can say that they have a good reputation for doing really quality, research-focused, meaningful work within that compliance framework, and while still meeting the needs of our clients. Yeah, words like clients, you never thought you would be saying so much as an archaeologist. So yeah, I'll kind of pause there and shift towards the community engagement side of stuff, because that, it sounds like there's some interest in what that looks like in the CRM world. And like everything in the CRM world, the community engagement aspect is really guided by regulations. And, honestly, stakeholder consultations that regulations require are probably what any of us would call kind of the bare minimum of community engagement, which is basically like notifying people that a project's happening, asking if they have some sort of desire to be involved in some kind of way, asking if they have particular information that should be included so that the project's in compliance. And their involvement the involvement of stakeholders can be really variable based on those responses that you get. But the regulations just kind of require that initial effort. And what happens after that can be really variable. That being said, there are some opportunities to do really good community engaged work that go above and beyond the sort of basic requirements. And I think the trick is to recognize these opportunities early on, and to frame them as a value to the project and to meeting the compliance goals, and then to write that into the project proposals and budgets and things like that. And all of us know that doing community engaged archaeology is not only the sort of right and ethical thing to do, but it results in better work all around. So you just have to work that into the project and convince your client that that's the case. So there's a couple good examples that I can kind of point to about how projects I've worked on have done that. So this photo on the left here is me on a very cold and foggy day in Marin working with a local tribe. We were surveying an area where we had some information that there could be some pretty important archaeological sites that are considered sacred by the local group. And so we, from the very beginning, knowing this information, had them involved at almost every stage. And so this is them involved with us in the actual field work going out there. And we wanted to do that because we knew they were going to see things differently. They were going to interpret things differently. And we were tasked with developing sort of a management plan for this area. And we wanted to make sure we captured those perspectives. And doing this kind of stuff, works to build really great relationships with local groups, which CRM has not always had a great sort of history of doing. So I'll say that while compliance is mandated through regulations, a lot of it falls to sort of individual efforts and relationship building. So that's to say that, it is totally possible within the CRM world. There's another project I'm working on, which is pretty interesting. It's actually a Caltrans project in the East Bay. I'm being purposely vague for all sorts of reasons. But we had some money that was sort of tagged for doing some additional archival work. And instead of us, meaning sort of the archaeologists, saying, great, we'll use this money to do research and answer these kind of questions, we actually started the process by coordinating with the tribe that we were collaborating with and saying, hey, like, we have the money to go do this archival work. What are some of the questions that the tribe is interested in exploring? How might we be able to use these funds and this effort to the advantages of the tribe? And again, that only was made possible by really starting that process early on. And then, yeah, this this kind of awkward photo of this wonderful gentleman to the right, that's Stan Harlan. He's like I think he's 95 now. I was working on a project, another Caltrans project down on the Big Sur coast, which was really, really great. I'll take any excuse to spend time down there. And of all things, it was another lime kiln site. So my dissertation was a lime kiln site, so that was fun. But consultation and community engagement, especially in CRM, is really often kind of just thought to mean working with tribes. That is a really important part for obvious reasons. But it also can and should be interpreted more broadly. And we've started doing that by doing outreach and consultation with local historical societies and archives and repositories, because they're stakeholders as well. And so with this work, I reached out to the Big Sur Historical Society, and they put me in touch with Stan, and because he had lived and grew up right near where the project area was, and his grandfather had actually worked at the lime kiln when it was in operation in the late 1800s. And so I was able to actually do an interview in oral history with him and incorporate that into our compliance document. And that made for better work, and made everyone really happy. So just a couple examples of the ways in which that has been done productively very recently in my experience. Okay, so already kind of maxing out some time. So I'll kind of try to distill some of these conversation points to what I might call kind of the good and bad of CRM consulting archaeology. So I've already kind of mentioned one of what I think is a good aspect of it is the diversity of projects in archaeology that you get to engage with, especially after your PhD, coming out of your PhD, where you've like had such tunnel vision and focus on one particular project. It can be really refreshing to kind of pull back and get thrown into all these different projects that are in all different areas, different time periods, different resources. It can be challenging, but it can be a really cool part of the consulting world. As I mentioned, it's a very dynamic work environment. You never really know what's going on. You always have a bunch of balls in the air. And like I said, that can kind of be a good or bad thing depending on who you are. Another good thing, I think, is the development of skills outside of sort of pure strict archaeology and archaeological methods. So, I now am really good at reading engineering plans and managing people, and a lot of things that I think make you a better archaeologist, but could also be extremely valuable in other ways and in other careers further down the line. Another good thing about consulting archaeology is job availability. There tend to be quite a few jobs available, especially in the Bay Area. I was just looking at the SCA job board before this presentation, and there are a number of jobs for consulting archaeologists at all levels posted right now here in the Bay Area. Development projects are always happening, and so this kind of archaeological work is always going to be in need. So that's a good thing. And another thing is the pay. I mean, nobody gets into archaeology for the money, but CRM does pay fairly well, especially at the position you'd be coming in with, coming out of the PhD program. And so you can kind of know that you'll be working in an industry and profession where you can make a livelihood, and even maybe survive in the Bay Area. So that's nice. Okay, the bad, the not so good. This is us getting a flat tire in the middle of nowhere, which happens more than I'd like. So a lot of the bad is actually kind of a flip side to the good. So with that diversity of projects, there can be a lot of sort of transiency in the consulting world. You know, you might be jumping from project to project. You might be living out of a hotel for a month and a half or something, or you can be away from home a lot. And so, yeah, you know, depending on your own desires and life situation, that could be good, it could be bad, but something to know about. Again, I kind of already alluded to this, but you spend a lot of your time doing not archaeology, you know, doing safety trainings, doing, you know, being on calls with clients. You know, I spent 3 hours on a call the other day talking about design alternatives for an overpass in Modesto. You know, it's not a bad thing per se, but if you're looking for a job that's just all archaeology all the time, not sure if that job exists, but you know, this probably is not that one. And as a general rule, kind of the higher you go up in a CRM company, the sort of less or dirt archaeology you do. It becomes much more project management type of work. So just something to know of for sort of longer term career paths. And then again, another thing I sort of already alluded to is that consulting CRM is a business, to be quite blunt. So everything is really framed by cost. And while that's true for academic research projects to an extent, in the CRM consulting world, you also have the added layer of profitability, right? And so you're always constantly having to negotiate what you want to do versus what you have to do, and then what you can do. So those are conversations you have to have with yourself and your team on a daily level. Right? And then finally, maybe a bad is that you don't have a ton of choice in the types of projects you take on in consulting world. You kind of get what you're given, right? So I know in academia, you start off with research questions and this topic you want to explore, and then you're trying to find the perfect site to explore it. And that's just not how CRM consulting archaeology works, right? The project defines what you're going to be doing. And sometimes that's really cool, like the lime kiln project on the Big Sur coast. And sometimes it can be really not cool, like the road project in Richmond or something, you know, like an urban landscape, suburban landscape where there's not a lot going on. So projects can sometimes be uninteresting and uninspiring, and you still have to go in and do really good archaeology and produce a quality product. So not everything is going to be a passion project, but you know, that's kind of life anyway. So yeah, the last thing I'll sort of leave you with before I turn it over to questions is to let you know that if you've kind of heard this stuff, and after we talk through some questions, if you're like, CRM consulting, there's some good and there's some bad, I think it's worth thinking about CRM as being a really great stepping stone as well to other jobs and positions within the archaeology world. You know, if you want a job at state parks or national parks, those are heavily compliance driven and project management driven, and you're not going to get one of those jobs without having some real practical, meaty experience in the world of CRM. And a consulting position will get you that experience very quickly. And even in academia, you know, I think we're all sort of seeing a pattern where many places are looking to hire new faculty that have some background in CRM, recognizing that a lot of undergrads coming out, if they're going to be working in archaeology, are going to be working in CRM. So you need to be able to teach classes that prepare them adequately. You need to have faculty that are experienced in that. So it doesn't have to be an either or thing. CRM can be, I think, a great stepping stone to other career options that might meet other sort of desires that you have. Okay, so that was kind of a whirlwind. Hopefully I hit on some things that were of interest to you, but as I said, I really wanted to save a good chunk of time to answer any questions or thoughts that you might have.
Thanks so much, David. That was great. Folks, you can turn on your videos on the Zoom here, and we can have a discussion and ask away.
Oh, look at all those familiar faces. Nice. I'm expanding you here.
If no one has a question immediately, I do have one, so I can take my my introducer's privilege here, MC's privilege. So it was really great to hear about all of the community engagement work that y'all are doing. And one of the things that sort of came to mind for me about that was, you know, thinking about dissemination of CRM research as well. And obviously, in some cases, it's very clear where that goes. Like, you know, if you started work with a tribe and with their research questions, then, you know, you're bringing those answers back to them, or you know, you're producing them collaboratively together the whole time. But in the case of like talking to Stan, and you know, having that connection with like a local historical society, like how does that work as far as like dissemination of your guys' results and that sort of thing? You have some interesting stories about that.
Yeah, no, that's a fantastic question. So, I mean, with any archaeological work, the main factor surrounding that is sort of privacy and you know, making sure that there's not some sort of protected information that is being too widely distributed. When you are working with tribes, they're actually usually the most sort of primary drivers about how far information can kind of flow outside of your sort of project, for, again, obvious reasons. So yeah, the data that you produce, I don't want to say always, because as I was saying, the tribal involvement can vary from project to project, but when tribes are really involved, that information is constantly being shared back and forth. And if you're doing it right, there's sort of a constant communication from every sort of phase of the project. When it comes to like non-tribal outreach and work, that is a really like project by project specific thing, and honestly like a personality by personality thing. So but again, it all comes down to communication. So when this opportunity to speak with Stan came up, I got in touch with the Caltrans archaeologist that was overseeing, who was essentially like who we were reporting to, and said, hey, this opportunity's come up. I think it would benefit the project in these ways. I want to make sure that it's cool within the scope of this project to do that. And I want to make sure that I can share our report with him when we're done, right? And so there was that kind of that clear communication up front. And so yeah, and sometimes the client will have confidentiality reasons where you can't share it. I mean, I'm working on a project right now where like the overarching body is the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, you know, like the people who keep track of like nukes and stuff, and you're like, they're not letting you tell anybody what you're working on. So it's a constant balancing act. But yeah, it comes down to sort of communication before you get too far into it, and knowing that that's kind of making it clear to the client that the contingency of doing that good work involves sharing that information on the back end. And in my experience, you know, if there's not some sort of like big security or confidentiality issue, people are supportive of that. But it can be really project specific and personality specific for sure.
Thanks so much.
Yeah. Lucy has a virtual hand raised.
Hi, thank you so much again for doing this. This is really interesting.
Yeah.
I have a couple of questions. One about sort of this distinction you mentioned at the beginning between sort of like environmental consulting firms that have an archaeology wing versus an archaeology specific CRM firm.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you can talk a little bit about that distinction. And then this is not so much of a question, but just I've been working on sort of a community project with Jordan that has involved some like not actual CRM work, but work with CRM data and stuff. And one of the things that's come up a lot is like sites being nominated or not to the National Registry of Historic Places. So I assume that's a significant part of your job, those kinds of things. And I was wondering if you could just speak a little bit about that.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you. Great questions. So for the first part of your question, it's not that the type of work you do differs too much, whether you're working at like an archaeology specific consulting company or for one of these bigger environmental compliance companies. It's just kind of, it's more kind of like organizational structure differences. So like Far Western, all we do is archaeology, which is really nice. I mean, we have people who do all different kinds of archaeology, and we have graphic designers that do like help put our reports together, and like I said, we have like geoarchaeologists. But like everything is archaeology specific. So that kind of makes it easier and cleaner in some ways because everything is a little bit kind of self-contained. Everyone's kind of on the same page. And, there can be, even at Far Western, which is actually a pretty small company, there can be some sort of organizational complexity. When you're working for these bigger environmental compliance firms, the archaeology is like one tiny team within this like massive corporation, right? And so it's not that the work you're doing is different, but the way in which it's done might be different. So, it's going to be a much more kind of like corporate structure. There's going to be a lot more hierarchies. You're probably going to end up like doing a more narrow range of work, but even that's not totally true. Or it's not a rule across the board. And yeah, and there's going to be the team in the room next to you that's like the bio team that's doing work on the same project and stuff like that. So, I guess a benefit to that is that there's less communication between companies, and one of those things might handle like multiple aspects of the compliance needs for one project. Whereas we will just be one team doing only archaeology, and there'll be, dozens of other teams doing the other stuff. So yeah, it's, kind of nuanced differences. And, I'd say if you think you might be interested in working for like a big company, then those bigger environmental firms would probably be a good fit for you. If you're not, if you want like a little boutique firm, these smaller compliance, these smaller archaeology specifics might be the one for you. Where I landed kind of tells you what I was looking for and what I wanted and what I like. And obviously I'm probably pretty biased, and there's probably someone from a big company that would tell you why that's so much better. To get to your second question, I didn't talk at all about what sort of CRM is. I had to kind of assume you guys had a rough working knowledge of that, but happy to answer any specific questions. I meant to make that clear up front that you might have about that. So yeah, I mean, when it comes down to it, the idea of like, is a site eligible or not, is kind of shorthand for, that's essentially what we're working towards in CRM, because a site that is eligible for the National Register means that it has undergone a certain degree of study to determine if it is considered historically significant or not in a legal framing, right? Historically significant is a legal designation in environmental compliance world. And what historically significant means that you've done the work to decide this is a site that has important qualities that mean it needs to be protected under environmental laws and it needs to be managed. Or you do your study and you find that it doesn't meet the threshold of historical significance, which means it essentially doesn't have any protections. Like, you don't have to manage it. And it's not quite that clean. Like, it's not like a site is recommended eligible and therefore is historically significant and you can't touch it, right? There are times when a highway realignment cannot avoid an archaeological site, right? So, and that site might, if that site's historically significant, it's going to have to be impacted in or affected in regulatory speak. And so what you do is then you then move on to the mitigation phase, which is where you basically have to come up with some processes to deal with the impacts that that project's going to have on this significant resource. And so mitigation can look like a lot of different things. For archaeologically significant resources, oftentimes that's it includes what's called data recovery, which basically means, okay, this road's going to destroy the site. This road has to be built, right? Like literally working on a project where Highway 101 is like eroding into the ocean and it's on a steep cliff. There's only so many ways you can reroute it. It has to go through there. It's going to impact this site. So data recovery, you would focus on like excavating and otherwise acquiring all the data associated with that site or the part that's going to be impacted, and then producing, records and reports that document that stuff and come up with a curation plan to make that stuff available for future research, with the idea being that if it's the archaeological data that makes that site important, then you are mitigating the effects of this development because you're extracting that data and sort of protecting that data. There's obviously a lot of sort of problematic aspects to that, and there's nuances to that. There's other kind of mitigation solutions as well, like it might involve putting up a display or putting funds toward developing curriculum about that site that gets made available to local elementary school students or something like that. But you have to do something to essentially counteract the negative things that are happening to that site. But that's essentially at the crux of what the M in CRM is, right? The managing of resources. That's mostly what your job is trying to figure out, well, not mostly, but a big part of what your job is figuring out, is this a site that we need to manage and how are we going to manage it? So that's kind of the first step.
Thanks.
Yeah. You could take a whole class. I could do a whole lecture on that. Not that I want to, but you could.
Speaking of whole classes on that, we have a question from Bill White in the YouTube chat. Which is not about classes, but yes, what does the job market look like for 2021?
So that's a great question. So I've been slammed and asking around, people who have been doing this longer than I have been talking about how this is kind of almost the busiest they've ever been in their career, which is strange, but also not that strange. You're working on development projects. Like I just said, I'm working on a project that it's being funded by Caltrans. A lot of our work is PG&E related. I'm working on a project right now that's a dam and reservoir expansion project. So you're talking about water issues. Like a lot of this stuff is like big picture things that are sort of critical infrastructure. So we were actually tapped early as being considered essential staff or essential services. And it's not that archaeology by any measure is an essential service, but because of our legal role that we play in allowing these projects to happen, you can't do these things until they've gone through the environmental review process. So we are kind of like looped into that, so in the same way that utility project, the guys building the utility line are essential service workers, we kind of have been lumped into that. So all that is to say is that there's a lot of work. Like Far Western is even looking to hire people right now with different backgrounds and specialties. And I know that I was actually just talking to my supervisor yesterday, and it sounds like a lot of a lot of companies in the area are also, they're looking to try to build out staff to meet this demand. And I don't know if that kind of like real busy environment will last for forever or for years. But I can sort of safely say that there is sort of a continual demand for like, for people that want to do this work, and especially for people that can do the kind of job that you're going to be able to do with a PhD, which is like come in, run a field crew, but also come back to the office and like write up a solid report, and be detail oriented enough to meet all those compliance needs and produce a really solid archaeological document. There's a lot of people that can do sort of the entry level field tech work, and there's not necessarily as big of a demand for that, but for people like us, there seems to be a pretty good demand right now. And I don't see anything in 2021 looking forward that would kind of curb that too much. I mean, fingers crossed. Hopefully that didn't just jinx us. So yeah, I don't know if there's any other questions. I'm happy to stick around for a few more minutes if you'd like.
I mean, we've got a couple more from the chat. Certainly, I'll, folks are on the Zoom here have questions, then I'll have those go first, since we're here live. But if not, I can funnel in the ones from the chat, which I will do. So speaking of probably more field tech sort of work, Chris Lohman asks if there are students who want to get involved, like while they're still undergrads in CRM work, what sort of role that would look like, or if there are particularly good opportunities for that.
For sure, yeah, that's a good question. I've definitely sort of catered this talk towards grad students, but the undergrad environment is a little bit different, because unfortunately, and I personally think this is kind of a problem with the industry as a whole, the sort of entry-level positions are filled by sort of on-call project by project needs in a lot of places, or in a lot of times. So you'll have full-time staff people that just have bachelor's degrees that work for you. Monse and Michelle, who I showed in this presentation, are two examples of such people who graduated. They have undergraduate BAs and are now full-time with Far Western, but they have like many years of experience doing like field tech work. So working for multiple CRM companies, jumping from project to project. And the downside of that is that there can be big gaps, like between projects. Nothing's really guaranteed. It's really actually exploitative labor position, but that's a conversation for another day, and there are some people that are having conversations about unionization and things like that might address these kinds of things. But on the flip side, what that means is that, if you're still working on your undergrad, or you kind of want to dip your toe into it to see if it's something you're interested in, there is opportunity for kind of, like project-based work. So a couple weeks here, a couple weeks there. And most of the field work is done in the summer months, when the weather allows for it, and when there's not snow covering everything, in the higher elevations. And so, yeah, I would keep an eye out. There's often, just kind of postings for that kind of field tech on-call work for companies. I know there's a bunch posted right now. I encourage you to get in touch with people like myself or other people that have full-time positions in companies and say, hey, can you put me on your list? Because essentially there's just kind of a running list of people for these sort of seasonal jobs. And when our staff is maxed out and we need to fill some positions, we start pulling from that list. And the more projects you work with the company and the more you build those relationships, kind of the higher on that list you end up going and getting pulled from. I will say that to really even get kind of that entry level position in CRM, you really have to have some field experience. It is really important to know that, even those on-call positions, you are expected to be a professional archaeologist, right? So like, it's not a field school. It's not an opportunity to teach students field methods. There is always kind of in the field teaching and learning going on. There's, even when I go out in the field now, there's people who've been doing serum archaeology for 30 years and I learn stuff from them. But you need to kind of know the mechanics of what you're doing out there. Otherwise you're not going to get called back, right? Like, it's not an opportunity to learn those things. So I would encourage, if your students are interested, encourage them to, volunteer, do a field school, work on your dissertation project to get that, learning and mentoring experience. And then they'll be ready to hit the ground running in those entry-level CRM positions. Yeah.
Well, we have one more question about sort of a different aspect of things. I'll put it out there. You can answer it at whatever length you feel like you've got time for. Cool. How do CRM policies relate to historic collections management, post-project excavations, and such as ownership and research available accessioning, or where can I put my excavated artifacts after the project?
Yeah, that's a good question. And again, this is kind of a stock answer, very project specific. So some larger agencies have their own collection facilities, or they have contracts with other, like, not private, but like Sonoma State has a really robust collections facility, or they might have contracts with sort of state collection facilities and things like that. So it really depends on where or who you're working with and where your project is and things like that. But that's actually something you have to account for, right, in your, like, even in your proposals and throughout the sort of project as the project unfolds. So it's not that you like end up with 80 boxes of stuff and then you're like, oh, where's this stuff going to go? Like, you're not even going to put a shovel in the ground until everyone's clear about where the stuff's going and who's paying for it, particularly, because it's not cheap to curate materials. How that kind of fits within the compliance world is kind of gets into that eligibility, historical significance sense. Like, if it's not a historically significant resource, you don't have to do anything with it. Like, it's up to kind of the client or you as the consultant to figure out what to do with that stuff. Oftentimes it involves getting buried on site. We're big proponents of donating those collections to like local historical societies or other sort of repositories that might take it for research purposes, even if it's not historically significant, right? Because any archaeological resource has some potential, but not technically in the compliance world, right? But then if it's historically significant and that material is excavated either as part of the testing phase, so kind of getting the data to determine if it's significant or not, or in maybe the data recovery phase or something, then that, that's going to be paid for at the client's expense as part of doing this cultural resource mitigation phase and in those studies. But how that actually plays out can be really variable. And so that's for the physical stuff. For the actual like documents, the site records you produce and the reports you produce, that all gets housed at in California at the information system, information centers, which are part of a broader system of basically data management repositories. And there's a bunch of them throughout California that service particular areas. So, the first thing you do when you get a project, you just say, we're going to be working in this area, and you request a search of the appropriate info center, and they say, here are all the projects, the reports that intersect with that area. Here are all the sites in that area or in the buffer around it that you've requested. So when you finish your work, you submit it to those same repositories, so it becomes part of the kind of that part of the archaeological record. Yeah.
All right, thank you so much, both for the talk and for all of the detailed discussion. You are a font, and we are fond of you.
Well, thank you again for the invitation. I meant to throw my email up there if people want to follow up with questions or, whatever, happy to sort of field those individually. So sorry, I didn't include that. It's just david@farwestern.com. So it's pretty easy. And you can find me on the Far Western website as well.
Great.
Yeah.
We got a lot of thanks rolling in from the YouTube chat as well. And we're very happy to have you on here, and hope to, see you in person at some point.
Yeah.
In the non-virtual future.
Definitely. I'll crash a beer night sometime.
Sounds good.
Yes.
All right.
All right. Take care.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.